Al Pacino's shocking statement next to Dianne Keaton's casket. I regret for the rest of my life not marrying her. The silent departure behind the icon's facade. The final morning. The quiet mystery of Dianne Keaton's departure. The morning of October 11, 2025, arrived quietly in Los Angeles. Yet within those calm rays of sunlight lay the final chapter of a cinematic icon's life. Dianne Keaton's mansion, once alive with laughter and creative chaos, had become a place of stillness, a sanctuary of imagination. As she used to describe it, that day, the sanctuary fell into silence. At 8:08 a.m., an emergency call was placed, person down. The brevity of those words echoed the fragility of life itself. When paramedics arrived, a woman, later identified as a household assistant, opened the door and led them to Keaton's study. Inside, the scene was eerily calm, the curtains half drawn, her reading glasses resting beside a half-finished script, her notebook open to a page scrawled with a single line. There's still time to laugh. It was as if her final moments had been spent in contemplation, not fear. Investigators described the room as immaculately arranged. No signs of struggle or chaos. A detail that spoke volumes about her character. Even in death, Dianne Keaton left behind a sense of composure, as though she had tidied up her soul before leaving. Hours later, the news broke across every entertainment network. Dianne Keaton had passed away at 79. Tributes poured in instantly. Words like legend, icon, trailblazer filled headlines. Yet behind those titles was the haunting uncertainty. What truly happened in her final hours? Family members released only a brief statement citing a sudden health decline. No official cause of death was given. Friends whispered about long-term illnesses, exhaustion, or even depression, but nothing was confirmed. Some noted that she had been more withdrawn in recent months, spending more time indoors, declining public appearances. It was this ambiguity that captivated and tormented the public imagination. How could someone so full of life, humor, and grace simply fade away quietly? In a way, the mystery mirrored the very essence of Keaton's artistry. Throughout her career, she was known for portraying complex women, quirky yet deep, humorous yet melancholy. Her departure carried the same contradictions, a peaceful scene masking untold struggles, a smile concealing the shadows of solitude. In that silence, the world felt her absence as a strange kind of noise, the echo of everything she had ever brought to cinema. From Annie Hall's nervous laughter to Something's Gotta Give's emotional rawness, Keaton had spent decades teaching audiences that imperfection was beautiful, and vulnerability was strength. That morning, her home became the closing stage. No cameras rolled, no director called, cut. Yet it was, in every sense, the final scene of a story written with honesty and quiet courage. Those who knew her best said Dianne had always feared one thing, being forgotten. But as the world mourned, it became clear that her legacy had achieved the very opposite. She had become immortal not through noise, but through grace. The irony is profound. A woman who lived her life in front of cameras left this world unseen, unrecorded, and yet, somehow, her final act, the dignity of silence, said more than 1,000 lines of dialogue ever could. The silent battle, illness, solitude, and the price of perfection. Behind Dianne Keaton's radiant smile and signature wit lay a long and lonely struggle, one that even her closest friends only glimpsed in fragments. Fame, for Keaton, was never a comfort. It was a spotlight that illuminated her brilliance while magnifying her insecurities. Throughout her life, Keaton was open about her vulnerabilities, a rarity in Hollywood. She had battled bulimia since the 1970s, an eating disorder she once described as the darkest addiction of my life. During the peak of her fame, while audiences celebrated her as the whimsical Annie Hall, she was privately fighting against herself. She confessed in later interviews that she could consume up to 20,000 calories a day, only to purge afterward, calling it a ritual of self-hatred I didn't know how to stop. Therapy helped her recover, but the emotional scars remained. Those who knew her said that even decades later, she carried an unspoken fear of judgment, not just from critics, but from her own reflection. The cheerful eccentricity that defined her public persona was often a shield, a way to mask years of insecurity and silent pain. Then came skin cancer, the battle that returned in her later years. Around 2014, Keaton underwent 2 surgeries to remove squamous cell carcinoma from her cheek. The experience humbled her, she later joked about it in interviews. But friends said she never fully recovered from the emotional toll. She was terrified of losing her face. One close friend recalled, "For someone who made a career out of expression, laughter, tears, nuance, that fear was unbearable." As the years passed, her body weakened, but she refused to slow down. Even in her 70s, she continued to act, direct, and write. Yet by early 2025, subtle changes became visible. Her once lively eyes seemed dimmer, her frame thinner. Close friend and songwriter Carol Baer-Sager admitted, "She still smiled, but the sparkle had softened, as if part of her spirit had already begun to fade." Her decision in March 2025 to sell her beloved Los Angeles home, the one she had meticulously designed and often described as my dream brought to life, shocked everyone. The sale price was $29 million. But the emotional cost was far greater. Many saw it as a sign that she was preparing for something, perhaps not consciously, but instinctively. She said she wanted to simplify. Another friend recalled, "But Dianne loved her home. That wasn't simplification, that was letting go." Even her daily walks with her dog Reggie, once a joyful ritual, stopped. Her neighbors noticed her absence on the familiar trail. Some speculated she might have been too weak. Others believed she simply wanted solitude in her final months. But solitude had always been a recurring theme in Keaton's life, not the loneliness of abandonment, but the silence of reflection. She often said, "Being alone isn't sad, it's a choice to hear your own thoughts clearly." And yet, as time passed, the silence grew heavier, turning from peace into isolation. Her longtime friend Bette Midler once described Keaton as the most extroverted introvert I've ever met. She could light up a room, then retreat into herself the moment the lights went out. That duality was both her strength and her curse. When she stopped attending public events and declined interviews in mid-2025, the media speculated about her health, but Dianne said nothing. She never liked pity. To her, dignity meant control, and she intended to control her story until the very end. In the months before her passing, those closest to her now say she seemed ready. Ready not in despair, but in acceptance, as if she had completed every act of her play. Her laughter, her eccentric wardrobe, her endless curiosity, all were expressions of a woman who had faced her demons and chosen grace over self-pity. Her life had always been a paradox, adored yet alone, powerful yet vulnerable, successful yet perpetually searching. In her final silence, that paradox resolved itself, not in words, but in peace. She left behind not the noise of tragedy, but the serenity of someone who had finally made peace with herself. The quiet funeral. The stars gather. The wind whispers, and Hollywood weeps. 3 days after Dianne Keaton's passing, on October 14, 2025, Hollywood stood still, not with red carpets or flashing cameras, but with the sound of the ocean and the rustle of olive trees. Her family had chosen a private seaside garden as the setting for her farewell, simple, quiet, and deeply poetic, just like the woman herself. There were no extravagant floral arches, no public spectacle. Instead, sunlight filtered through the branches, casting golden shadows across the white chairs arranged in modest rows. The guests, actors, directors, and lifelong friends, sat in reverent silence, their grief unmasked. The ceremony began with a soft melody, not a church hymn, but the familiar piano theme from Annie Hall. The notes floated through the air, trembling slightly as if even the piano itself mourned her. There was no priest, no formal sermon, only love, memory, and the wind whispering through the garden. Bette Midler, her dear friend and co-star from the First Wives Club, arrived first, dressed in black but wearing a white scarf. She later told a reporter quietly, "Dianne hated pure black. She said it made sadness too serious. So I wore white, for her light." That statement summed up everything Keaton stood for: elegance wrapped in rebellion, grief softened by humor. Her 2 adopted children, Dexter, 29, and Duke, 25, stood at the heart of the ceremony. Dexter, her daughter, spoke with a trembling voice. Mom taught us that life is a comedy, sometimes clumsy, sometimes painful, but always worth applauding. She laughed even when it hurt. And that's what made her extraordinary. Tears rippled through the small crowd. There was no paparazzi, no speeches rehearsed for the press. What remained was raw humanity, a gathering of people who had loved a woman not for her fame, but for her warmth. When Woody Allen stepped forward, the air grew heavier. Time seemed to pause as he looked down at her framed photo, the familiar image of Dianne in her wide-brimmed hat and black turtleneck, her eyes gleaming with irony. His voice cracked as he said, "Dianne was the embodiment of creativity. She didn't act, she lived. She lived with humor, self-awareness, and courage. There's no one else like her. And there never will be." Close friends like Francis Ford Coppola and Robert De Niro stood silently nearby. De Niro's eyes were red. When approached, he simply said, "I cherished her. In this world of chaos, she was a kind soul. That's rare, and we just lost one of the last." Reese Witherspoon, visibly emotional, brought a bouquet of wildflowers, Dianne's favorite. Goldie Hawn placed her hand on Reese's shoulder, whispering something only they could hear. It was a moment that transcended celebrity, a moment of shared loss among those who had once laughed, fought, and dreamed with Dianne. As the ceremony drew to a close, Michael Douglas stepped forward to deliver a short reflection. Dianne made imperfection beautiful. She made honesty fashionable. She made Hollywood human again. No applause followed. Only the ocean's waves broke the silence, as if nature itself offered the final tribute. When the casket was lowered beneath the olive trees, a soft breeze swept through, scattering petals across the grass. The setting sun painted the horizon gold, reflecting off the water like a final spotlight. It was said that in that moment, a single bird flew across the sky, circling once before vanishing into the distance, a poetic symbol no camera could capture. It was, in every sense, the perfect farewell for Dianne Keaton, unpretentious, beautiful, and deeply human. Those who attended left with heavy hearts, but also a strange sense of peace, as though her spirit had whispered, "Don't mourn too loudly. Laugh a little. That's how I'd like to be remembered." Her legacy, they realized, wasn't just in her films or awards. It was in her way of living, with humor, self-respect, and relentless authenticity. She had turned life itself into art, and her farewell was the final brushstroke on that masterpiece. Al Pacino's eternal regret, the love that never found its ending. When the world learned that Al Pacino had chosen not to attend Dianne Keaton's funeral, speculation swirled, but those who knew him understood. It wasn't indifference, it was pain. For Pacino, Dianne wasn't simply a former co-star or past lover. She was the single constant thread running through the chaos of his long, brilliant, and often lonely life. Their story began in 1971, on the set of The Godfather. He was the rising star from New York's intense theater scene. She was the free-spirited Californian whose laughter could turn any moment human. As Michael Corleone and Kay Adams, they gave the world a cinematic love that felt painfully real, because it was. Off-camera, their chemistry deepened into something rare, a bond of intellect, humor, and unspoken need. For more than a decade, they lived between passion and distance. Dianne once confessed in an interview, "I wanted him to be mine. But Al belonged to his art." Pacino, equally conflicted, admitted later, "I wasn't ready for what she deserved." His obsession with work and his fear of permanence drove him away again and again. The final break came when she said, "Marry me, or we're done." He walked out, believing there would always be time. Now, standing before the memory of her casket, that illusion of time shattered. Friends said he wept uncontrollably the moment he heard the news. He spent hours in his study, staring at old photographs, Dianne laughing behind oversized glasses, Dianne holding a coffee mug during rehearsals, Dianne on the set of Reds, teasing him between takes. To those who reached out, Pacino only murmured, "I can't believe she's gone. I thought I had more years to tell her what she meant." He did not cross the gate of her funeral because, as one friend revealed, he wanted to keep her image untouched, alive in his memory. Not in a coffin. The man known for playing gangsters and kings of tragedy could not face the realest loss of his life. Among his few cherished possessions is a silver bracelet Dianne gave him for Christmas in 1975. Engraved with her handwriting, "Don't forget to smile. Even when the world is against you." It remained in a drawer by his bedside for 50 years. After her death, he reportedly began wearing it again. In interviews over the decades, Pacino always spoke of Dianne with a tenderness that slipped past his usual reserve. In 2017, during a tribute event, he told her publicly, "I will love you forever." At the time, it seemed like nostalgia. Now it reads like prophecy. Those close to him describe his grief not as loud but consuming, a quiet, lifelong ache. He told a friend, "We all play roles. With her, I could be myself. I just didn't realize how rare that was until too late." For a man who built his career portraying regret, irony is cruel. His greatest role has become his own unending remorse. Keaton herself had once said, "The most beautiful thing about love is that it never really ends. It just changes rooms. Perhaps, somewhere beyond the reach of cameras and applause. They share that room again, no scripts, no expectations, just the unfinished conversation of two souls who never truly said goodbye." As twilight settled over the Hollywood Hills the evening after her funeral, Pacino's home remained dark except for a single lamp by his piano. A neighbor reported hearing faint music, an old recording of Seems Like Old Times, the song that closed Annie Hall. It was playing on repeat. That song, with its bittersweet melody, captured the essence of their story, two artists whose lives intertwined between laughter and silence, who could never quite hold each other but could never let go. And so, Dianne Keaton's final gift to Al Pacino was not a memory of love fulfilled, but of love enduring, proof that even regret, when born from something genuine, becomes its own kind of devotion. In the end, the world lost an icon, but Pacino lost his mirror, the one person who saw through every mask, every performance, and loved the man beneath. His whispered confession, "I will regret for the rest of my life not marrying her," was not simply grief, it was truth distilled by time. For the rest of his days, every stage light, every film set, every quiet evening will carry her echo, a reminder that some stories, though unfinished, remain eternal.